Welcome everybody to today's webinar titled Turn Your Existing Infrastructure into a Network Defense Powerhouse. I'm Mike Honeycutt, Product Marketing Manager here at Corero Network Security. And today we're going to talk about what we believe is a smarter, more cost-effective approach to service availability and DDoS protection, and one that makes your existing network infrastructure part of the solution. And we call it Universal Mitigation or a Universal Mitigator. Joining me today, and I'm so happy to be able to talk to this man, Chad Bohannon, our Senior Solutions Engineer. Chad's worked closely with our customers to deploy this sort of solution across telco, SaaS, and hosting environments. Chad, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very happy to be here.
Oh, it's awesome, man. We always have great conversations, so I'm glad to bring this to the entire world. Chad, first off, let's define what is a universal mitigator to those who are watching, and why is it important?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very broad term, right? So universal mitigator in really our terms are about redefining how we approach network defense. So traditionally, we have been known as a DDoS defense company, but realistically, we kind of scale far beyond that, right? So with universal mitigation, the concept here is to open up APIs, generate plugins, and leverage infrastructure that can handle large network attacks, malicious network packets, things of that nature, leveraging equipment that was designed to handle packets to begin with. So probably the best example of it is leveraging something like flexible firewall filters on a Juniper router, right? So rather than sending that traffic over to one of our devices, or maybe allowing it to hammer a firewall and potentially flood it, tip it over, we place enhanced Berkeley packet filters directly into the routers and block that traffic, drop that traffic pre-interface processor.
That's interesting, man. So we're talking about existing infrastructure. I mean, can you give us some examples? Like, are we talking about smart NICs here, or what are we talking about when you're using existing infrastructure that can handle this filtering?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the direction and the vision we're going is to be able to mitigate wherever it makes the most sense. So first off, really, when you're talking about universal mitigation, we have two aspects to it. The intelligent data in, right? So we'll often refer to that as telemetry, but that could come from anywhere, right? And then where do we enforce, where do we block the traffic? And really that is, generally going to be as close to the source of the malicious traffic as possible. But when we talk about east-west traffic, when we talk about blocking efficiently in very, very highly virtualized environments, smart NICs are exactly the direction we want to go.
That's so cool. I mean, what's driving the evolution? Like, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think that probably two things are driving the evolution. The first is really too many tools, too many windows, too many FTE hours trying to deal with security threats or network threats. Yeah. The other end of it is really about automation. So we have a lot of intelligence available to us, but acting on that intelligence is sometimes difficult. So a great example, Michael, would be we have EDR systems out there that are running on hosts, gathering lots of valuable intel about how malicious actors, malicious packets are moving through the network, what they're executing on, how they're compromising systems. But taking action against that to block it before it ever enters the network generally becomes some kind of manual feed, or somebody might create a SOAR playbook to try and deal with it. But really that just redirects the traffic to another highly vulnerable system, right? So your firewalls start getting hammered, they start tipping over. So we want to be able to take that intelligence in and do something automatically with it. Right. So in this case, what we want to do is mitigate it as close to the edge of our network or as close to the source as we can.
I love that. And I'm glad you talked about automation and tech bloat, because those are two things that really come up a lot, especially as organizations struggle to deal with the complexity of managing all these tools, and then the actual man hours and time to actually manage those tools. I mean, so on that point, how does universal mitigation or a universal mitigation strategy, how does it answer or solve for problems that traditional tools can't today?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of scale, right? So as networks continue to grow, we have more and more diverse data centers, we have multi-cloud environments. So where our data is housed and where it's accessed is becoming very diverse. Standing up complete infrastructure stacks from a security perspective across all of these sources obviously has a high monetary cost to it. It also has a high FTE cost, right? Just trying to manage all of these diverse environments, bring them together in a cohesive way. So part of what we're trying to do is really allow a single pane of glass that can take intelligent feeds in, that can expose APIs that allow you to, even where we don't have smart plugins, where we don't have a pre-existing feature, use your own existing telemetry to drive via API a mitigation source that's common and ubiquitous, right? So then we manage the action. You may have 1,000 routers out there. You just need to tell our orchestration engine what you want to block. We'll determine where and when we should block, how we should block.
That's so cool. I mean, and right on cue, there was a question that came in and it asked, can it integrate with tools that they already have? And it lists like WAFs and SIMs, and it sounds like it can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the goal here as we continue to evolve, and keep in mind, right, we started on this journey really with leveraging routers. So BGP Netcomp or FlowSpec was early adoption. It's something that has been very common in DDoS for a while. Then we went down the Juniper path. They exposed something called flexible firewall filters using netconf config. Gave us much tighter, more granular ability to block, right? Then we opened up the APIs. And so to your point, we have a number of examples today where people are taking intelligence from a WAF, for example. So rather than continuing to scale out their WAFs and buy bigger and bigger boxes, what the WAF does very well is identify the traffic, right? Bad malicious traffic based on known signatures, various OWASP updates, things of that nature. What it cannot always do very well is handle the large volume of bad traffic. So it does block the traffic, but as that traffic scales, you either have to continue to scale upwards in your WAF environment, you have to spread the load across multiple using GLB, or you have to block it elsewhere. So today in the examples, what they're doing is taking the telemetry in, saying, here's the bad source, here's the bad payload, what it looks like, destination ports, all of the relevant data that makes that a unique attack. They share it with our system via APIs and execute what we call a flex rule, which we can then basically push out to edge routers. We can redirect that traffic to one of our scrubbing sooners. Net result of it all is that we leverage enhanced Berkeley packet filters to craft a policy that very tightly mitigates and blocks that known bad traffic, attempts to mitigate any collateral damage. And we do that whether we're pushing it out to the Juniper routers, whether we're doing that on scrubbing today. And we're looking at some new and exciting things we'll talk about in a minute, not quite in production yet, but really where we take this next.
Thank you. And so another question that came in, and I think this is a good one, what kind of latency or I guess efficacy could we expect from this technique or method versus proprietary hardware?
I mean, it's really a little bit of an open-ended kind of conversation. So from a pure latency perspective, let's say everything is automated, dialed in, tuned to perfection. As soon as you get the bad traffic alert, you're pushing an ePDF to us, or you're using an API or whatever the case may be, and then we're taking action. And those raw standards, I'll call that a clean lab environment. You're talking microseconds, right? It happens very quickly. And that has really been the goal and the success of Corero all along is automatic response, right? How quickly we identify and respond to the threat. Really, we're second to none in that space. So now, can there be other factors, right? So this is where I say it's an open-ended question. Oftentimes when you're dealing particularly with third-party technology, so I mentioned EDRs, you brought up the WAF concept, there's going to be thresholding within those systems before they decide to take action. So if you're measuring latency from the time the very first bad packet comes to the time when all of those bad packets are blocked, then it could be dependent upon how the underlying telemetry system, whether that be the WAF, whether that be an EDR system, whether it be a captive port or whatever, but what is it tuned? What thresholds are it tuned to before it starts signaling outwards, before it starts saying, hey, we need to take action? That's
a really good answer. I mean, it's very compelling. I mean, what makes Corero different? What makes it possible that we can do this, and why are we the only ones talking about this?
Well, I think probably the nimbleness of the company, the fact that we've always tried to drive automation, drive down FTE hours. This is just the next evolutionary step for us. Why are we the only ones talking about it? I mean, it's not easy, and we've got a jump start. Just being transparent, the ability to leverage the eBPF filters and using that as kind of a universal signature base, if you will, or policy base, really opened up the doors. So when you're talking about, well, are other DDoS competitors doing this? No, they're not, but it's because they haven't done that foundational work, right? So traditionally they're relying on FlowSpec if they're going to push to a router, or they're relying on their own signature engines internally. And they may leverage BPF or eBPF in some of those scenarios, but they haven't really started to exercise how do we expand this outward. For us, the goal is always to drive down costs, whether that be employee overhead, hours invested, administrative cost, whether that be physical cost with appliances, et cetera, allowing you to reuse your purpose-built packet brokers. But we want to drive down costs. We want to drive up automation, which ultimately reduces the time to respond. That's the name of the game in security. So I don't know that I can directly speak to why others aren't talking about it. I can tell you the reason we're talking about it is this is the next step in security, right? The bad guys keep taking more aggressive steps. They start using adaptive attacks. We start getting vectors that change during the attack to, expand the outage, if you will, or the attack surface. So we need to take telemetry in from all of those visible tools that our customers invested in, and we need to be able to take action on all of it. Obviously, being a large-scale volumetric packet broker allows us to do that quite efficiently.
It's great insight. I mean, and you talked about the changing vectors that came out in our threat intel report, right? We know how fast these attackers are changing vectors, and to be able to keep up and be adaptive is absolutely key. So you started talking about this. I want to lean into it a little bit more because we've kind of talked technical, but what's the operational value to the business? I mean, what does this mean to business stakeholders?
Ultimately, what it means is you can have your intelligent people, your smart hands, your technical people that are really focused on identifying new threats, deploying new projects, right? We can have them focused on things that continue to drive business revenue rather than playing defensive guard all the time, right? Yeah. So when you're spending all your time just trying to keep the lights on, it doesn't allow for a lot of innovation, doesn't allow for a lot of product development. The customers that leverage Corero today, they know this. That's why they do business with us. They understand the high levels of automation and the value it brings. So really, it's just about continuing down that path, not only for our existing customers, but to start bringing additional ones into the fold, right? I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to segue here for a second, Michael, but I mentioned earlier, we have a very interesting use case we're developing now for a very, very large scale SaaS provider, right? So 100% cloud. They operate only in public cloud infrastructure. Today, they're operating in what I'll call the big four. Forgive me, folks that are more cloud savvy than I. There, you may have different big four, but AWS, Google, Azure, and OCI. Across that, they have about 49 regions across all those clouds, a little over 4,700 VPCs. No infrastructure of their own. They don't own a router, right? And so what do? They can't place hardware in these public clouds, so they can't put our servers in. So what is it that you do? They came to us with this interesting challenge, in this case around really understanding TLS-based attacks, right? So we'll get into ZTAC in a minute and what we're doing, but they heard wind of what we're doing with ZTAC, and they're like, hey, we have this problem, right? We have these volumetric attacks that are coming in from unauthenticated users. And at the end of the day, if they're unauthenticated, they're not valuable to us. We don't care about the traffic. What can you do? And also, can you help us protect our login page? Because they're smart enough that they're hitting it knowing that you can't really rate limit or shut down access to it. So what are our options here? And again, leveraging telemetry, in this case, from a very common cloud infrastructure proxy called Envoy. So Envoy does a very good job I won't go into the details of how it works, but a lot of people who operate in the cloud, especially large SaaS providers, are very familiar with it. So we were able to develop an eBPF sidecar, right, that basically will help us look at that traffic, post TLS decryption, start understanding what the critical infrastructure is compared against an identity and access management database. Are you authenticated? Are you not? Are you sending good requests? Are you just failing to log in? Or are you hitting me 5,000 times a second with a login refresh and they're all bad, right? Are you brute forcing, things of that nature? We'll take the telemetry out of that system and craft very, very narrowly scoped eBPF filters to push back into their cloud gateway, their internet gateway in this case. It's very much a work in motion, right? So I think we're all very happy with the progress, but once that takes root, once we finalize that, I think there'll be some more exciting things to discuss in the future around it.
It's fascinating because it seems to be a very consultative approach too, right? Like it's like you're not looking for a one size fits all. I mean, I think that's the whole point, is that you're working with what they have. You're taking, what they've got going. In this case, they didn't have much to work with. You had to really adapt to what they did have, so it wasn't a traditional use case. I really love that. It's a really good use case.
Correct. And it's part of the vision and really the thought leadership that we have here at Corero, both in the executive leadership team, but also in our product engineering team, right? So what we've understood and what we've come to realize is that we've talked to more and more customers. Keep an open mind, keep open ears, right? Because what may not sound like a problem that fit clearly into our wheelhouse in the beginning, really once we understood that, well, at the end of the day, we're just crafting eBPF filters. And many of these technologies out there in the cybersecurity space have the ability to leverage eBPF filters. They have the ability to create them themselves and to send telemetry data based on eBPF. And so we find that common denominator there across these security stacks. And for us, that makes things easy because then we only need to manage the communication stream, right? If we're all leveraging the same underlying technology, then it's really just how do I communicate to you to implement that technology? So that could be a REST call. That could be netconf like Juniper. It could be a traditional HTTPS call on a management console when we're talking about Envoy proxies and sidecars. So these are all standards-based technologies, standards way of communicating. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't create a 1,000-yard sprint, if you will, for how are we going to get this implemented. All of the underlying tools together, it's just a matter of picking the right ones to fit this customer's needs. So apologies, very long-winded answer, but absolutely the goal here is to meet the customers where they are. So we are out having interesting conversations, bring us the problems that you're having a hard time tackling. Let's see where we can go.
No, I appreciate the answer. And really quickly, so we had another question come in from Nicholas. He asked, when you're applying these filters to, for example, Juniper routers, which impact has the filter and mitigation service to the router CPU thresholds? Take an MX204, for example.
MX204, yeah, absolutely. So essentially what you're doing here is allocating part of the dynamic memory space within Juniper. So I don't want to speak on Juniper's behalf because ultimately we are leveraging what they call flexible firewall filters. It's based on underlying eBPF technology, but essentially the impact is very low. So they say that they can support roughly 100,000 simultaneous filters. I think their current numbers are about 1 million total characters with zero impact. Now, a lot of this is going to be in a clean lab environment. So if you've got huge MAC tables or forwarding tables, et cetera, as you're aware, Juniper doesn't really use the term TCAM, but they use very similar dynamic memory groups to achieve that. And these do go into that shared space. Now, just let me give you some real world examples, right? Rather than what's possible or what does it potentially look like, we have customers doing this where we're pushing upwards of 1,000 of these filters simultaneously across 100, 150, 200 routers, very large telecommunications providers. In fact, we had one just this week, just yesterday, down in South America where we crossed over about, I think it was 1,300 of these filters simultaneously. No impact to the routers. So very scalable.
Wow. Awesome. Thanks for the answer. Nicholas, thanks so much for the question. And we advise everybody to keep them coming. So Chad, you gave a really good real world example. I kind of want to pivot a little bit here for sort of more complex environments and or multi-site and, you know, hybrid. How does this impact high availability across multi-site hybrid environments? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer is we have a highly resilient system. So from our base platform, which was really the management console, the orchestrator of all of this that we're talking about, we refer to that as Smart Vault One. It's based on an underlying Raft implementation. So witness nodes, for those familiar with kind of HA versus resiliency, it just creates an odd number of nodes. And then you always have one that's a witness. So if you become unreachable from one location, we have a witness server out there that says, hey, don't go into split brain or dual management node. Let's have an election. Let's choose a new leader based on current communication and availability. That scales across. So again, because we're not having to recreate technology every time we take on one of these new kind of avenues of mitigation or network defense, we're just leveraging our existing footprint. And really what we have to develop is the new communication path. Okay, what standard are we going to use to communicate with, say, an Envoy proxy? What standard are we going to use to communicate with, say, an F5 WAF? And please forgive me for naming specific vendors, probably not something I should be doing, but I just trying to give some real world examples. These vendors already have ways that they want you to communicate with them, whether it be REST APIs, whatever. And so really we're just executing on that. I don't know if that was a clear answer to the question.
No, but it's a good example again.
Yeah, we have resiliency. So
that's awesome. And something else I wanted to touch on, because you touched on it earlier. You said ZTAC. So that's our zero trust admission control. If you're new to seeing us, or if you haven't been to the site lately, it's a capability that we've launched. So speak on that and how this relates to what we're talking about, because you kind of went there earlier, and I just want to close the loop.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I mean, and probably someone in product engineering is going to be like, oh, that's not exactly correct. Forgive me. But in my lens, ZTAC is just another example of universal mitigation, right? So traditionally, we've been talking about some sort of network traffic, whether that be from an EDR host, from a WAF. But at the end of the day, network traffic has come into some system that is designed to inspect it and look for bad stuff. And then signal, and we'll go create a block. ZTAC does the same thing. It's just not network traffic. It's AAA logs, right? So now we're reaching into identity and access management systems, and we're saying, who are your authenticated users? What are they privileged to access? And then we're using it to secure what would traditionally be very hard to secure endpoints. So great example in the healthcare space. VPN concentrators. We have, zero trust technologies in place at a lot of these, but at the end of the day, all of their users need to hit a central gateway, right, in order to authenticate. So how do you protect against that? How do you protect, as I said earlier with the SaaS provider, a login page where this is the place where they're supposed to go and authenticate? So what we're really doing is taking telemetry and feedback, saying, who is authenticated? Okay, allow them through unrestricted, right, to the areas they should access and control. Who is not authenticated? Okay, can we rate limit them? Can we look for specific spikes in bad behavior? What we would say is bad behavior. If you're sending, 2,000 requests a second, even 200 requests a second, it's probably not a human on the other end of that connection, right? So can we use that to rate limit these people down to mitigate the impact of attacking these centralized and traditionally unsecurable endpoints? Because at the end of the day, Michael, attackers are smart. If they can't get through, you've invested all this money in zero trust, they can't break down the walls to get at the data that they want, or to exfil, or whatever their motives may be. All right, well, what if I just kick you offline? So in the old world, we'd say we're going back to paper, right? Retail outage. Okay, everybody's got to pull out the old credit card rolling machine and hand signatures and the whole nine yards, going back to paper. Well, it's kind of the same thing. The attackers, if they take down your critical access infrastructure, they force you to start using means that bypass zero trust, that bypass some of your more hardened security. So really long-winded answer. At the root of it, zero trust admission control is about looking at the identities, identifying the known good, trying to identify the known bad, and really allowing a little bit of buffer space for the ones in between. So if you
real quickly to tie it back to Universal, though, we're leveraging something existing in their architecture, right?
In ours, yeah,
these,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're using their identity and access management logs. It could be a feed out of those logs. It could be SNMP traps that are sent on. There's many different ways that we can ingest that based on which tooling they're using. But then again, on the other side, it's the same universal mitigation. We could be sending that to our scrubbers. We could be using your edge routers. We could be looking at something like an Envoy proxy or internet gateway in the cloud to execute and filter out the malicious traffic.
That's awesome. So thanks for closing the loop. I just wanted to make sure, because you mentioned ZTAC earlier, and somebody would have said, well, what's that? And we should have another conversation on ZTAC, because that's obviously.
We should. I get very excited about it. So I probably just speak a little too much, and my apologies for that.
No, I love it. I love it. I mean, my last question for you is sort of, it's more around, who is this applicable to? Is this just applicable to IT? Is it also applicable to the OT world? And we've talked about how ZTAC is applicable in OT. But can you speak to that in the universal mitigation lens?
I will. For my days at Harley, I've got a few OT gurus in my network. So to you guys, just offer me a little grace here. I understand that we're going to hit this at the 50,000 foot level. But yeah, realistically, IT and OT today are becoming a little more blended. Traditionally, they've been air gapped, sometimes complete island networks with no access to the IT infrastructure. But as PLCs and Andon systems and things that drive manufacturing have become more modernized, right? We've gone to modular manufacturing floors, things of that nature. We need the flexibility that IT brings to the table. So what that means is a lot of these systems are starting to bridge. There may be a firewall in between, but at the end of the day, they are connected. The two networks are connected. And in some more modern manufacturing plants, they're one and the same. There's no distinction between IT and OT. It is all considered operational or revenue generating. So is it applicable to both? Absolutely. Possibly more applicable to some of the OT networks, because you can have 1,000 people standing around staring in the air if your manufacturing lines go down, right? If your production lines go down, whatever they may be. And so obviously the bad guys, that's their target, right? In many ways, and you're going to have to give me a little leeway as I try to connect the dots here, but in many ways, it's like a hospital. Hospitals are very similar to OT networks. Everything they do is production line. And so what do the bad guys try to do? Take the hospital systems offline, right? You can't deliver medication today. You can't have a doctor come in on specialization. Telemedicine's out of the question. You can't access your patient records or, MDR, ER systems. So pay us a ransom and we'll let you access the stuff again. Same thing applies when you're talking about traditional OT networks. If you take down a major plant, whether that's in petroleum, whether that's in traditional manufacturing, you have a lot of overhead that is sitting around doing nothing, from materials to people, etc. Pay me a ransom and I'll let you start producing again, right? So they need to be protected in the same ways, and absolutely universal mitigation applies in the same way. So we can take telemetry data in from these same endpoint systems that are designed to keep things operational resilience, and then use that telemetry data to identify and block bad traffic before it gets into those environments.
I love that answer. So Chad, we're coming up on the end of the webinar. Any sort of parting words that you could leave with anybody who might be interested in universal mitigation, how we can continue the conversation with you?
My parting words would be give us a call. So at the end of the day, really, if you have challenges that you don't have a clean solution for, or even ones where you have a solution in place, but it's cumbersome, whether that be financially or administratively cumbersome, let's have a conversation around it. So we've done a pretty good job here of defining what it is we're doing. The underlying foundation for the technology is how we go about executing the mitigations, whether that be routers, whether that be scrubbers, proxies, etc. So my parting words would be, let's have that conversation. Do not continue to think of Corero as a DDoS specialist, right? We really are. We have effectively branched out at this point into network protection, and we're going to continue to scale in that direction. So be part of what drives that growth, right? Help your use cases define where we go as a technology company. Or wait, let other customers help drive it and buy it later, as we're seeing with ZTAG. Either works, but don't be afraid to engage.
I love it. And also, I mean, speak to a vendor that it will actually listen to your pain points and will take a consultative approach and not just try to sell you a one-size-fits-all solution. We'll actually try to solve your pain point. And I think you've illustrated that today. So as Chad said, we invite everybody to come speak to us. You can find us at Corero.com. There's a real simple button at the top of the page that says speak with a specialist. And then there's also a number, and there's several ways to contact us, but we'd love to talk to you about your specific use cases and see how we can get you protected and give you peace of mind today. Chad, thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today, brother.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me ramble on, Michael. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise. Y'all have a good rest of your day. Bye.